Steel and Flame, Book 1 of the Guilds of Avlaan series is available on Amazon. If you like fluffy wolf lolly protagonists and Japanese light novels, follow the link below to check it out.
Hello, Leonardo Cornejo here with another video, and hoping you are being nice because Santa is coming. Inside your mom. Santa is coming in your mom, and you better be nice because otherwise she's going to get triggers. No, I'm joking. Because otherwise you're not getting gift. Just kidding. No, but the thing is, Christmas is coming in your mouth, and and we are in a festive season here, talking about who is in the good list and the bad list, and everyone is in the fucking bad list because you're all going to horny jail. I know. Now, the jokes aside, but since we are talking about moral alignment, and I am a writer, I have been extremely critical of moral grayness for quite a while, especially of the kind of nihilistic, stupid moral grayness of George R. R. Martin. I want to talk about how to do it right using a video game, a very unexpected one, in fact, for that, Genshin Impact. Why? Because despite everything bad with China and with Genshin Impact and with Hoyo, the writing is quite fine. I'm not gonna say great, but it is quite fine. It can elicit emotion, and it can actually handle moral grayness. Here is the fun part. Chinese law is actually quite strict on moral grayness. They basically kinda forbid it to some extent, because they want this morally outstanding society. And even then, Genshin Impact has managed better moral grayness than, as I said, George R. R. Martin, and than most Western writers. And Genshin Impact has managed that moral grayness better, and in general is better at writing than many woke writers. The Genshin Impact writing team is better because they understand morality. Here's the fun part, because I will explain how and why they step by step how and why they have actually achieved that, how and why they have actually achieved better portrayal of gray morality. First of all, and this is important, to have gray morality you need to have morality. That's something most Western writers seem to fail at, especially woke ones. They don't seem to understand that you need morality to have moral grayness, to have moral neutrality. You need to have morally good and morally bad characters. And Genshin Impact, before introducing the morally grey characters, starts by introducing the morally bad and the morally good. Starting off with you could say they introduce moral grayness from the very beginning, because the protagonist is very morally neutral, but it's not precisely grey morality, because the protagonist is not willing to cause harm to others for personal gain that easily, but rather void morality, basically the one who goes with the flow. That's the protagonist. But the first thing you are introduced to, not counting emergency food rations, is the morally good characters. Because the first character you meet is Amber, who is part of this group of people who help others. And immediately you are guided to the Knights of Favonius and the Adventurers Guild, who are the morally good guys. Especially the Knights of Favonius, who are basically paladins who do everything in their power to be good people. There is basically no villain from that faction, no bad guys from that faction. you are introduced to these characters who are basically the morally good guys, and you are also introduced to the morally bad guys, that is the Abyss. They are more like a Lovecraftian evil, but you learn that later on. But the thing is, you are introduced to the Abyss as the morally bad characters, and to very specifically La Signora, who is one of the members of the Fatui, who are very important for this video, by the way, who is a very manipulative, scheming, and violent woman, and she's absolutely fucking evil. She's evil. She's not morally grey, but the moral greyness is related to her indirectly, because you are introduced to the Fatui as a constant bother in Mondstadt, but not as necessarily enemies. And that's the important part. You're introduced to the good guys and the bad guys. The good guys are the Abyss, and the bad guys are the Abyss, and the good guys are the Knights of Favonius. And you start interacting with the locals, and you start helping them, and you basically become one of the good guys. And meanwhile, you have the morally grey and neutral but antagonistic faction of the Fatui, whose behavior in Mondstadt, led by Signora, is absolutely evil. For most part, your interaction with the Fatui for as long as she's alive is morally evil. But basically you are also introduced to that, to the evil part of this grey morality that is the Fatui. The Fatui are one of the main morally grey factions in Genshin Impact, but of course that's not where this video ends. We're going to analyze in more detail later on why, and the other morally grey factions, because as I said, you're introduced to the good guys, the Knights of Favonius, the bad guys, the Abyss, and this, at that moment, apparently evil faction of the Fatui, who are constantly antagonizing the protagonist, who are actually scheming with the Abyss to some extent. And then you start progressing through the story, and you start seeing the moral greyness of the Fatui more and more. For example, with Tartaglia, who is, I think he's not, I don't like him, I don't think he is precisely a good person, but he's probably the most morally grey of all the Fatui, because he's not a good person, but he isn't trying to fuck everyone over. He just wants to fix what he thinks are his problems in the worst way possible. And he's this violent, manipulative guy, but he's not unless it is necessary for his goals, he's not trying to antagonize the protagonist. He's not vindictive toward the protagonist. I don't like him, but he is one of the first morally great characters you meet in the Fatui. And you start seeing how he acts, how he sees the world, and that's why many actually like him, and that's why many actually sympathize with him. Meanwhile, Signora is a complete psycho, and she's actually often she's actually causing trouble to Tartaglia during the arc they both are forced to interact. And you see this, as I said, this moral greyness in the fact that the Fatui are not basically even getting along with each other because each one has their own method. And you see more and more the threat of the Abyss, the actual abject evil of the Abyss, and comparing it to the Fatui, who are basically just trying to move through an agenda with their own methods, and it's very different. And then you go to Inazuma, where you face two antagonist factions, which are the government and the Fatui, who are actually cooperating with each other, and you don't know what's going on. But in the end, you see again this moral greyness, and you start to realize that because during the first arcs, during the first two regions, when you interact with the gods, with the Archons, they are the good guys too. You have Venti, who is a symbol of freedom, who is trying to help his people. You have You have I forgot his human name, but you have the Geo Archon Rex Lapis, who is trying his best to help his people, but also to make them more independent, to not make them need the gods that much. And he's basically trying to become a human. He's not evil. He actually likes his people. But then you go to Inazuma, and the Shogun, who is the Electro Archon, has gone completely insane and has basically established a tyrannical government with the Vision Hunt decree and all that stuff. And it's all part of a plot planned by Signora through manipulation. But you have this morally grey faction of the Inazuma government who basically will do everything to follow the command of the Shogun, even if she's wrong. And she does many horrible things through the story. And you start noticing that the gods are a little bit more morally grey than you expected. And then you go to Sumeru. And again, you have the Fatui being the bad guys alongside with the Abyss. You have all this conspiracy to create a new god. And you have the locals actually conspiring against the Dendro Archon, against Nahida, who is basically a new Archon replacing the one who died trying to stop the corruption. And you have all this situation where you basically realize that the gods in this world are not almighty. They are not basically united by a single mindset, and you are introduced to the heavenly principles, who is this force which apparently rules the world and has been inactive for hundreds of years, but who can, according to Nahida's threats, smite anyone who performs a transgression upon the world. And that's how she threatens, I think it was Il Dottore, who she threatens with that, and he accepts his defeat. And then, right in the middle, on the between starting Sumeru and entering what is and entering Fontaine, you find out the gods are morally great too. How? You have been hearing about the gods, about how the seven are the great, about how the heavenly principles protect the world, about how the heavenly principles preserve stability, and suddenly you find out all these horrors of the Abyss are actually a fucking cruelty. While you already probably found some of these during your journeys with Dainsleif, who tells you about this ancient civilization of I don't know the correct pronunciation in English because I play it in Japanese, but of this place Kainruya. You are constantly told that they betrayed the world, that they committed a transgression to the heavenly principles, and they were punished for it. And now they are involved with the Abyss for some reason, and all these hilichurls and all these creatures from the Abyss are mostly involved with them, are mostly the people of Kaenria. And you meet Caribert, and that's when you realize God is an asshole in this world. That the heavenly principles, who is actually a creature from another world, is this lawful but morally grey entity who punishes any transgression in the most horrible and inhumane way possible. That even a child who had nothing to do with the transgressions of the people of Kaenria ends up paying for the crimes of someone else. Because it's not even his parents, of someone else. That the heavenly principles is a tyrannical, morally grey ruler, and that maybe the Fatui are not that wrong in the rebellion against them. that the gods are not even all aligned with the ideals of the heavenly principles, and that the abyss is basically using that pain and resentment caused by the heavenly principles to spread evil. Then you go to Fontaine, and it gets worse regarding the heavenly principles, because at once the Fatui are actually the good guys. They start helping you. The unit led by Arlecchino starts helping you. They are not your enemies. They don't even really try to fight you. And the bad guys in this one, and that's where the moral greatness starts, because both do good and bad, is the heavenly principles, is the gods faction, because out of anger at the previous Hydro Archon who broke a rule. As I said, it's a lawful neutral deity who basically, the heavenly principles is a lawful neutral deity which it basically punishes you if you don't follow the rules, and the rules are extremely arbitrary and the punishment is extremely abusive. Since the previous Dendro Archon made a few water entities into humans, the heavenly principle decided. The heavenly principles decided to punish the humans of Fontaine by making, but basically using their weakness, which is a type of primordial water, as a way to eliminate them eventually. And you have all this huge conspiracy led by the previous Hydro Archon and the current Hydro Archon to end that with an act of sacrifice. And the Fatui are trying to prevent the catastrophe too, in their own way. So basically the Fatui are willing to ally with the Abyss, not because they consider the Abyss the good guys, but because they are actually evil, but because the Fatui are actually trying to challenge the heavenly principles, because the Fatui consider the heavenly principles are wrong and are trying to stop them. Also in Sumeru you have all these lost civilizations which were victims of interactions with the Abyss in an attempt at destroying the heavenly principles or challenging the heavenly principles, and the heavenly principles doing nothing to help them because they are mostly inactive. You have, for example, the King Desert, who is victim of an attempt at defying the heavenly principles, not because the heavenly principles punished him or his people, but because the Abyss used this thing called forbidden knowledge to corrupt him. Basically everyone who interacts with the Abyss ends up ruined, but everyone who interacts with the Abyss but there is many people tempted to interact with the Abyss, trying to defy the heavenly principles, either seeking retribution for the cruelties of the heavenly principles, or in an attempt at freeing themselves from the influence of the heavenly principles. And in Fontaine you see that the heavenly principles is an entity willing to punish in the harshest ways, and that it's cruel and vile, and you also see evidence of that in lost civilizations like Kenria, like Enkanomiya, and this other civilization in Fontaine, I don't remember its name, and the desert regions of Sumeru, which were part of another civilization. And you start to realize that the heavenly principles have basically laid ruin to anything that defies them, that bothers them, and that the Fatui are just basically trying to free the world from them. But they are still not the good guys. That's the thing. They both are morally grey, because the heavenly principles preserves the world, preserves order, and the Fatui want to liberate everyone from the heavenly principles. But at the same time, the heavenly principles punishes harshly, with cruelty, with hatred, and the Fatui cause destruction in their wake, because they are willing to use whatever means necessary. And then you have the morally good characters, the protagonist, and those who ally with the protagonist, who the protagonist starts as lacking of morality, of moral position, until the leads start interacting with the Knights of Avonius. Both Paimon and the player character lack direct moral alignment. They just understand that they are not in favor of evil, but their interactions with the good characters make them morally good characters too. And again, back to the main plot line. Then you go to Avlaan, where basically it's everyone against the Abyss, because the Abyss is basically trying to destroy the world with Avlaan as a entry point. And you have the Fatui, the Archon, and basically everyone working together against the Abyss. The Abyss is the real bad guy. You have the real good guys and you have the real bad guys. And you have the Fatui, who are constantly acting as morally neutral. And you have also the dragons, who are basically not counting Fontaine, basically powerless, but they were an ancient civilization which was overthrown by the heavenly principles, whose power is the power you use in general, and who don't really like humans. But they have their reasons to basically they have this reason to not like humans, because they consider humans as lesser, and they are basically now completely weak in comparison to humans because of what the heavenly principles did. And some of them start to realize that humans are not necessarily the enemy, that the real enemy has always been the Abyss. And then you have all these morally grey factions and a few morally good factions fighting against one single morally evil faction. And that's the important part in all this. That's where this analysis leads. To have good moral grayness, you need to have morality. You can't make the whole world, all the factions, all the characters morally grey. You need to have morally good characters, morally good factions, and at least one absolutely evil entity. At least one absolutely evil force which can highlight the good parts of the morally grey characters. You can have morally grey characters, you can have morally grey factions, you can have even morally grey protagonists. But for moral greyness to exist, you need morality. You need the characters who are morally good, you need the characters who are morally bad. Because if everyone is morally grey, then there is no morality. And therefore, there is no quality. Because there is no measure, there is no consistency, there is no thing you can use to measure the greyness of the morally grey character. Because when no one has morality, when there is no one good or evil, you can't define the in-between. You can't define the middle point. That's the problem with most Western writers, especially woke writers, nihilistic writers, not necessarily woke, but certainly nihilistic, who basically write everything and everyone as morally grey and set aside all potential for good or evil. That's in fact, and I am going to make it clear first, and I'm not saying that's the case with Warhammer, but that's in fact what makes Warhammer work as grey morality, because you don't have the measure for the absolute good. But you have the measure for the absolute evil. And then you have all these morally great characters who are mostly the humans. And they are fighting this absolute evil of the chaos gods. When you have either absolute good or absolute evil, well, more like not absolute, but when you have well-defined good or well-defined evil, and preferably both, you can make the morally great characters, the morally great factions, work in a way that they do look as morally great. Where you can say they are doing this for a purpose. They have a reasoning behind this, even if I think it's wrong. Instead of basically looking like assholes the author wants you to sympathize with, or assholes who seem like this fetish for the author, which is what Martin's works look like to me. And you're going to say, but you have Bran, who, yes, but Bran is a cripple. Bran is not precisely a character. You might argue he's the morally good character, but even he is not that morally good, and George R. R. Martin has made a focus on everyone being morally grey, on everyone being an asshole, basically. Just different measures of asshole. And that's the thing. Moral greatness without moral good and moral bad. Even though you might argue it's more realistic, it's terrible for a story. Makes characters that are a lot less likable, a lot less interesting, a lot less memorable. People often forget Bran. And you say he's a morally good character, and even he is not precisely the absolute good, he's just the impotent good. Because he can't walk, he can't fight. When you are powerless, it's harder to do evil. But when you have power, and you choose to not do evil, that's when you are good, and that's the important part. And that's the important part in the case, for example, going back to Genshin Impact, that you have literal gods who are capable of deciding to do good or evil, and most of them choose to do good or stay morally neutral. You have Venti, who, even though he seems neglectful, sorry, it failed again. As I was saying, you have Venti, who, even though he seems neglectful, he acts that way according to his values because he wants the people of Mondstadt to be free. You have Nahida, who is actually rendered impotent through most of the story, but she actually wants to help the people of Sumeru. You have the Hydro Archon and Furina, who are not the same person. Spoiler. Yeah, you had it coming. And they actually are willing to go through a nightmarish sacrifice to save the people of Fontaine. You have the Pyro Archon, who is willing to die for the people of Natlan. The only Archon whose morality is very questionable is the Shogun, and even she is not motivated by evil, she is motivated by pain and fear. And she actually thinks she's doing the right thing. Back to the grey morality part. You have these well-meaning people who are not perfect, but they do what they think is best, and they try their best to do what is best for their people. And they have the power to do it. They have the power to literally kick an eldritch god back to where it came from. At least in Natlan they did. You have these beings who are absolutely powerful, and they choose to do good with their power. And that's the thing. That's why I don't think Bran counts as really good. That's why I don't think there is a really good character in Game of Thrones, or a really evil character, because you argue, oh, but this undead, yeah, but they are more like a natural disaster. They are not precisely a person, and that's the argument many have given. Both the argument many have given about the absence of a true evil in Game of Thrones is that the evils, in quotations, are natural disasters or morally great characters. But you have, and people could argue that you have Daenerys who becomes evil in the show. Well, first of all, that's in the show because the books are not over and they will never be. And even then, you could argue, oh, but she's evil. No, she's not evil. She's abusing power, but she's still morally grey. Everyone in Game of Thrones is morally grey according to George R. R. Martin himself. And that's the problem. You don't have evil. You don't have a well-defined evil. And you don't have a well-defined good. And when you don't have well-defined morality, grey morality becomes nothing but a buzzword. When you don't have a well-defined morality, you can't really argue that a character is morally grey or not, because there is no measure. As I said before, you need a measure of morality. For you to say there is grey, you need to have black and you need to have white. In a more scientific sense, even, because I don't like to use the terms black and white for morality, because, and this is the fun part, because I really like to wear black, and because in some cultures white is associated with death, so that's why I don't use it often. But when we speak of a system of binaries, which is black and white as an example, where you have extremes, where you have light, which is white, and the absence of light, which is black, where you have the light of a sun and a black hole, and in between you have all these colors, you have all this grey. To have grey morality, to have grey as a color, you need black and white. You need light and the absence of light to have grey. And I'm talking about physics. I'm talking about the sense of color. I'm not talking about light and darkness as in good and evil. Again, because I don't see light and darkness as good and evil respectively, because I do think light can be evil, as in are this in non-philosophical terms harmful, as in radiation, and darkness can be harmless or beneficial, as in you need to go to sleep sometimes, and darkness actually contributes to the sense of needing sleep. In fact, the excess of light can actually harm your sleeping schedule, and the absence of light can help you recover that sleeping schedule. So I don't think light and dark as good and evil in the more material sense. That's why I don't like to use the terms in the more philosophical sense. But since we are speaking of in-betweens and of analogies with color, you need light and dark to make grey. You can't make grey morality without good and evil. You can't have the middle point without the extremes, because without the extremes, the middle point doesn't exist. Simple as that, because it's the middle point of something. That's simple. In everything. You can't have a middle point between hot and cold without having hot and cold. You can't have a middle point between long and short without having long and short. To have a middle point, you need a measure, and that's a problem, as I said, with many woke and nihilistic gray morality, because woke gray morality comes from moral relativism and a rejection of all notions of universal morality, and nihilism comes from a rejection of everything, including morality, including universal morality. That's why, as I said, therefore, you don't have a measure. And since you can't have a middle point without a measure, you can't write a good middle point by discarding the measure. If you want, for example, let's say you have a meter long board, a meter long wooden board, and you want to cut it right in the middle, right in the 50 centimeter mark. If you have something to measure it, you can make an accurate cut. But if you throw the ruler away, if you throw the measuring tape away, and just try to cut arbitrarily where you think it's the middle ground, there is a good chance one half will be longer than the other. And if you don't even know anything about measuring and you don't even pay attention to where the middle ground really is, you might end up having a cut in the wrong place, very very far away from the middle. That's the problem with these people. That's the problem with these writers. They have thrown the measure away. They have rejected the measure. That's why you are so tired of grey morality. It's not because grey morality sucks. It's because bad grey morality without a measure of good or evil sucks. Because they don't have good and evil to add grey morality into, to put this middle point, to put this measure of the middle point. And therefore it's boring, because you have all these works from the East. I use Genshin Impact as an example because it is an example of a work that the writing is much better than everything else, and it shouldn't be, because we are used to have, when one part is bad, everything is bad, including the writing, like with pretty much everything made by woke companies. But you have this game where the monetization is bad, the gameplay is bad, the writing is good. That's why I picked that example. But you have all these works, manga, anime, video games, where you have these morally great characters, but you have a well-defined good and evil, and that's what makes those characters likable. That's what makes those characters work. If you didn't have the proper measure of good and evil, those morally great characters would be awful, would be boring, would be uninteresting at best. At worst, they will be obnoxious and annoying, like the characters from Rick and Morty. That's the problem with these writers. They don't have the measure. They threw the measure away, or they build their measure based on their ideology, based on their arbitrarity. You need universal good. You need universal evil. You need cosmic evil even, which is what Genshin Impact did, applying the forces of good against a cosmic evil, and the morally grey uniting against that cosmic evil when it puts everything in danger. You can write good morally grey characters, and I say that as someone who has been very open against morally grey characters, because I'm tired of bad morally grey characters. But you can write good morally grey characters. First, you need to define in your own story what is. To write morally great characters, you need to define in your own story first what is good and what is evil. You need good and evil to write good grey morality. Well, that's it for today. Have a good one, and Merry Christmas.